Hello everyone, and welcome to the third webinar of Penetration Testing, a short course presented by IT Masters on behalf of Charles Sturt University, or CSU. My name is Guy Coward, and I'll be your MC. Your mentor is Jeremy Koster. Let's get the usual housekeeping done before getting into things quickly tonight. Mercifully, not much from me. We encourage the asking of questions and the use of chat during the webinar, and there are two ways to do so in Zoom. We ask that you direct all course content related questions to the Q&A section, and that you send all administration type questions to the support team in chat. You can chat with panelists only, or to your fellow students as well, and you can make that choice by toggling through the drop-down box once you have opened the chat log. As I say every week, there are some very experienced industry-based attendees who will be most helpful with any queries you may have. We'll have Q&A sessions periodically, most likely right at the end, and I'll interrupt if there's anything particularly relevant during the course of the webinar. Sophie is again around tonight in an administrative and technical support role for IT Masters. Sophie's also responsible for the learn.itmasters.edu.au website, or the Moodle site, which is where you'll find the other materials needed for this course. Discussions, forums, and quizzes, and all of the activities that we have for you. But I think that's enough for me, so let's welcome Jeremy back.
Hi everyone. Welcome to module 3 or week 3 of this short course. Thanks Guy for the intro, and good to see a good number in this course. Continuing on as we go through exploitation and password attacks. So beginning of the week, we talked about, we set the scene for why we have pen testing and the ethics around pen testing and kind of the logistics around what you would do as a consultant or an internal pen tester. Last week we talked about identifying or actually doing some research in Google and open source intelligence and finding targets for service enumeration or vulnerability scanning. And then once we found some services and some vulnerabilities, things we can throw passwords at, then we would do the exploitation to attempt to gain access or get access to data that maybe shouldn't be allowed. So that's what this week is about. We're actually going to talk about the how we might exploit certain services. I'm going to try a couple of demos. We kind of touched on demos last week, and this week we'll do some actual exploitation, which will be fun. But I am going to use the tools, so don't expect a command by command, you know, hex shell or shell written in hex that I'm going to upload through some brand new vulnerability. That's not the case. What we're mainly looking for in penetration testing in the first instance is the low-hanging fruit, because this is what is going to be attacked by the malicious people first. So there's a good stat in the database investigation report by Verizon around how long it takes for a vulnerability to be exploited in the wild. And in years gone past, it's been a couple of weeks. But then they had this other stat that said, what was the most common vulnerability age of a breach, right? So what vulnerabilities were involved in a proper breach and what was the age of them? And they said it was a couple of years. So on one hand, exploits are coming out quickly for vulnerabilities and they are being used, but not for the major things. The major things are being perpetrated by exploits that are actually quite old, for vulnerabilities that are quite old. So what we want to do, you know, and it doesn't address all the risks, but what we want to do is take a risk-based approach to all of our penetration testing. So if we're trying to find a vulnerability, we do actually want to find the low-hanging fruit first. We want to find the weak passwords. We want to find the vulnerabilities in Apache or in struts or in, you know, in WordPress that are going to be found by bots. So that stuff first, because bots could cause you problems, and they actually kind of, you know, bots the scripts that run around on the internet looking for these vulnerabilities and making use of them to propagate themselves. And also, bots are often used by criminals and fraudsters to identify vulnerable systems, and then they come back later and see if they can pivot from that into something internal. So we're really looking for that low-hanging fruit. We're trying to get rid of the 90% of attacks that occur, and that means we're looking for those service versions that will identify a very obvious vulnerability or a critical vulnerability that is quite old. Obviously, if you have a recent vulnerability that is quite old, and this is true, and I'll harp on it again with the MS 17010 that WannaCry used and Petya used, that was a very old vulnerability, but the industry didn't know about it for very long. We knew about it for a couple of months, but it was such a juicy vulnerability that there was viruses that came out, you know, a couple of months after and made good use of them and caused a lot of damage. And in saying that, we actually got very lucky, I think, on the most part with WannaCry because it got defanged. But then with Petya, obviously there was some severe carnage. But on the whole, in Australia, I think we got away with, you know, most of the, you know, with minimal damage compared to what it could have been. If there was a few extra lines of code in the virus that actually looked for, you know, what open connections there were for that machine to other Windows boxes, then we could have been in severe strife. But the point there is that we are still looking for that low-hanging fruit. That's the first thing. We're looking for the obvious issues. There will be the cases when we have exploits on vulnerabilities that are not so obvious, but largely, and we're going for this risk-based, this likelihood and impact, we're going for a high likelihood and high impact. Those things that are trivial and easily known and easily identifiable and are, you know, and allow access to interesting data and can cause damage to systems. So we're identifying exploits. So how do we do this? Well, we have the Nmap, we had the Nmap scripts, we had OpenBAS doing vulnerability scans. We had all different ways of identifying versions. Now, sometimes versions don't come back, but we get to know what is running on the system. So we saw that WordPress was running. We might do a exploit search, and I'll just see if I can do this. I haven't tried this. Yeah, that works. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen for a second. In Kali, if you've not installed it, or if you haven't got the package that has it, do an apt-get install search exploit, and you can install the package. And I'm just going to share my broader screen. Now, this will be a test because I've actually managed to grab myself a different USB wireless card, just in case it was the wireless card being the problem from my last disconnects. But if you lose me for a second, I'm keeping a good close eye on it. I'll be back very quickly. All right, I'm sharing my double screen. All right, I'm hoping you can all see that. Guy, can you just confirm you can see that all right?
Yep, can see.
Good, okay. All right, so at the back here, I have, I've run a command. Search exploit will give you, you know, the usual help if you don't give it any parameters. Let's see. You can see there, search exploit AFD Windows local. This is just showing you how you might be able, you can even do it by port. But what we'll do is I'll just do a search exploit WordPress, and you can see why WordPress causes us so much trouble. That was impressive, wasn't it? Okay, there we go. So we get quite a few for different versions. And if you're able to find out the version, and like Drupal as well has similar things, you can see I'm still scrolling up. There's a lot of WordPress plugin problems, and you'll see some of the VulnHub images have these as well. So as you can see, we have a version here. So let's just say we have an ebook plugin that we're able to identify, and we know the version. So we just do a WordPress search exploit, and we can probably even grep this to ebook, and we can see that we've got all the things to do with that might be to do with ebook. I'm not happy with that because it looks like it's gone case sensitive. Yep. And you can see there's one for ebook 1.1. And if we have that, then we might try it. And it shows you where this exploit is in the search exploit database. All right. So what search exploit does actually gets you the exploits down to your machine as well. So they're nice and easy access. But we know that a lot of these, and you can all go there now if you want. If you go to exploit DB, it's a big list of exploits as well. And what they usually are is just scripts, either bash scripts or Python scripts, or even just text files explaining how to make, break in or use an exploit, and how to, exploit a vulnerability and get the access you need. So that's the way we do it. We look at the service that we get from Nmap and other tools, and then we use searchploit or exploit DB to find the vulnerability. And then also we can use Metasploit. It has an inbuilt search function. Metasploit is obviously the kind of gold standard for bundled exploits and professionalism for exploits. And obviously Metasploit, the premium version or the pro version, is very well maintained. But it's not the end of the game there, right? So the trick is actually making the exploit work. If you think about this, all these exploits come from people who are just trying different things, have found something that's strange in software, and they have been able to work out how to break into it. Now, often that is dependent upon the libraries and the system that they're doing it from and certain conditions on the endpoint. There is not a lot of quality checking. There is a big community behind this. So if there's one that's well worth using, or I think in Searchsploit, no, in Metasploit, it gives you a confidence rating of how kind of good it is. And you might choose one with a higher rating than one with a lower rating. So that's kind of the next step. But getting the exploit to work is the tricky part, and making sure it works. And getting to know and actually creating a little database of your own, a bit of a wiki of your own on how you've broken into stuff on VulnHub and what has worked and what have been the tricks. Because often it needs that little bit of tweaking or some extra library, and it's hard to find out. And you're doing Google searching, you find that one bit of information that helps you to break into something or to exploit the vulnerability. You've really got to write it down and start building your own knowledge base. Now, the whole idea of writing your own, you can do that. There's obviously tutorials about that. That is kind of going into the next level. If you are writing your own based on someone else's, or if you're writing your own on a vulnerability that is brand new that you've identified, that is heavily into research. Now, Guy asked me who this guy was in the picture, and I'd say that's me at about 3 AM looking for vulnerabilities in a machine. But that's really what we're doing, trying to identify an exploit. And sometimes it is arduous. You're moving on from one service to the next. You're trying an exploit, it doesn't work. You don't know how much time to put into a certain exploit. And this is why it's really important to practice all these things, because if you have no knowledge of how this exploit works outside of the prime time you're using it, then you don't have the luxury of being able to have prior knowledge of it. And that can take a lot of time just fiddling around with it. So the suggestion is that you build up this knowledge base, you build up a playbook for certain vulnerabilities, and you look for those vulnerabilities. And I dare say that happens with most professional pen testers. They know what they're comfortable with. They look for that and they get them. That's why it's good to rotate. If you're an internal person engaging with pen testers, sometimes year on year you might rotate who you're getting a pen test from, so you get a different skill set in there and having a look. The other option is crowdsourcing stuff like BugCrowd, which is kind of the new kind of wave of pen testing style work, which has it's a good business model as well, but fits certain things. But we'll chat about that a bit later on.
Jeremy, just before you go on,
Yep.
I just chucked in the chat an open question. Does everyone else think that your picture game on the slides is very strong?
All right.
Overwhelming positive feedback. So
good.
That one. Also, I've got a question from Amber via does Searchsploit use Exploit DB?
Yes, it uses the same database from ExploitDB, a copy of it.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so it's important to update that, obviously, and that's a good point for your labs to keep your systems updated. And the beautiful thing about VirtualBox, and if you've got enough hard drive space, to make sure you get an external drive to store these things on, is that you can take snapshots of your virtual machine through VirtualBox. And if you get a certain vulnerability or certain exploit working for a vulnerability, and then you update everything, it doesn't work anymore, it might be a good idea to revert back to saved and then try to get and keep that snapshot if you ever need to actually run it. So yeah, it's a possibility. Quite cumbersome, but it is it does happen when you update and things stop working again. I remember there was a version of SMB library, the CIFS, the Samba library, that decided to stop telling Metasploit or enum, the tool enum, we talked about it last week, that enumerates all the Windows services. It actually stopped telling enum what version of Samba was running, or what version of Windows or SMB was running. And that's a really big problem, because you're waiting for that version information, and you had to actually go into Metasploit and use a separate way of getting use a auxiliary search to find out, or auxiliary scanner, sorry, to find out what version of SMB was being run. So yeah, so things do change. So do make sure you keep things up to date, but you also need to have backups to get back to where you were. So service to exploit, HTTP, obviously. So HTTP is kind of it's the main highway, and I can't believe I've said it, but yeah, it's like the super information highway, to use a much loved term. HTTP is obviously, and HTTPS clearly with the TLS around it, is how we deliver a lot of our web services these days. Well, a lot of the internet-based services these days. But obviously on a local network, there's SMB CIFS as people try and share files with each other. Obviously, there's some excellent remote shells on that if they're not being patched for a long period of time. We have DNS that can be exploited with cache poisoning. So you can actually get false entries in there with certain techniques and get man in the middle. SNMP often have poorly set community strings, or default set community strings. You can get a whole lot of device details and lead into something else. There's some fascinating things in SNMP. SMTP, obviously you can have open relays, but you also can enumerate users and even get remote shells on vulnerable SMTP servers. I know that SendMail had some very bad exploits for quite a number of years before it kind of cleaned up, and all people moved over to Exum and Postfix. FTP, obviously anonymous login. You can see what the files are there. You can also do, remote shell exploits on certain FTP servers. But what I found a lot, even in other, kind of obscure ways of getting directory traversal, getting out of the container in which FTP has because when an FTP server is set up, it's set up in a root directory, and that's a subfolder in the FTP server, but getting out of that subfolder can be a challenge. But there's all sorts of ways you can do that the way the FTP servers are, because obviously the FTP server has access to the whole folder structure, but limits you through software. So if you can find a way to trick that software and give you further access, then that's what we're trying to do. All right, system attacks, we can pass the hash, because obviously when you get a password and you get a token back, that token becomes the password then. So if you can grab that token and then pass that along in some fashion to another server, it will give you access that you asked for. So pass the hash is essentially taking the result of authentication and unfolding that and using it elsewhere. Man in the middle attacks is really getting in between the traffic of two systems, a server and a client. Maybe you're downgrading the SSL so you can crack the encryption and get the data out of it, and maybe you're maybe you're altering the route of the data so that you're funneling it through somewhere else and being able to modify it. To my knowledge, and with pen testing, they're not, the man-in-the-middle attacks are quite sensational and actually are less of a concern than just plain breaking into stuff or guessing passwords. These actually require you to do, trick the both ends or one end in particular, to try and send information a certain way and manipulate that. It's possible, I've seen it done, but I've not actually had it identified in any particular professional pen test that I've had done over the years. Obviously, if you've got someone pivoting a lot and going deep into penetration testing, then they might use man-in-the-middle attacks, but that would be quite a deep version. NAC bypass, network access control, is used by a lot of organizations to make sure only the devices they want to be on the network can come on the network. And often they're just MAC address authentication, or sometimes they're username password authentication. There's a possibility of being able to spoof a device and try and get on as the printer, because often the printer doesn't have the smarts to be able to authenticate like a workstation does, like with 802.1x. So yeah, you can get sometimes NAC bypass that way. And then obviously DHCP starvation and rogue DHCP. So what happens when you take up all the IP addresses of a DHCP range, by having, you can imagine having lots of virtual machines getting all the IP addresses. What actually happens then, do systems fall back into a known range that you can then attack? Or can you get people to have the IP address and the gateway that you want them to, and then start a man-in-the-middle attack, or start to sniff, more likely start to sniff data passing through that client that you've duped into using your IP address, and your using an IP address you've provided, and your IP address is the gateway. Are they going to send authentication credentials for a weak service that way? So it's a good way to get information as well. Also a good way to understand what they're talking to. Still, there's a lot of web that is HTTP. There's been a push to HTTPS in the last couple of years, but there's still HTTP out there. So wireless attacks are excellent. Oh, and I have to explain this. Obviously, services to exploit, we're trying to find a vulnerable opening in that castle, and this is just the obligatory, matrix screenshot. And wireless. I wish wireless still looked like this.
Yeah, with that surely would have the crystals.
Yeah, yeah, it would. Yeah. All right. So one of the obvious wireless attacks is having a rogue access point. If you're a pen tester and you're able to get access physically, just plugging a rogue access point into the corporate network is a great way to get access, bypassing all the firewalls, especially if you put it into a location that has good bleed to the outside footpath or even to the road. You can park a car there and go for your life and start scanning internal things. The evil twin, and I've had this situation before where there has been rogue access points on a corporate network, and we have tried to find. They're really difficult to find. There are some tools in something like Nessus that allow you to look for residential gateway MAC addresses from common vendors, and then that can pop up and say, hey, we think you've got a residential gateway, like a TP-Link or a Netgear sitting on your corporate, and it can let you know. But the other way is to get a directional antenna and then point it around the room, and then find where the signal is strongest, and then walk in that direction. Very fun. It's like the high-tech Easter egg hunt. We did this in a corporate once, and we found a couple of rogue access points. We would ask those around them, who owns this, and no one would own up to it. So we'd, being the security professionals that we would unplug it and leave our cards and say, if they want to come and get it, they can give us a call. And by the end of a couple of months, we probably had about 6 wireless access points in the cupboard that no one ever came and identified. So you may find them, and these were all poorly configured, right? So default password. So they were a very big risk to the organization. It is getting harder these days with rogue access points because everything does a wireless access point. All those dongles, I've worked in telco for a long time. One telco I worked for would hand out 3G and 4G dongles to staff so they could work, you know, like they were, you know, like they were easy to come by. So when you did this kind of rogue access point look on the floor, you would see about 20 or 30 access points, and it was very difficult to figure out what was going on. So it's not always possible, but they are dangerous. Well, the evil twin attack is an excellent one. So evil twin will try and get a client to associate with a wireless network that is the same name as their corporate wireless network. So, and if you have the EAP authentication, so the enterprise authentication for that wireless network, then it's going to send your hashes. And I think I talked about this a little bit last week, but basically you can get the client to pass over its hashes. And the only real way to protect against that is to make sure the client will only associate with known access points by certificate. So validating that access point is who it says it is. So that means that those computers all have to be managed, which is a big deal. This is really fun at a security conference or at a computer conference. If you fire up Kismet at a well-populated area that's got lots of laptops, you'll find those laptops probing for the networks they know about. And obviously the temptation is to fire up a wireless network access point. If you're a pen tester, this might be what you do at an organization. Is fire up an access point with the same name as one of those network access points that is being looked for, and try and get an association. That's evil twin. De-authentication. This is more of a denial of service. Some of the anti-rogue access point systems work this way. If they see a rogue access point, they will flood the network channel that the rogue access point is on with de-authentication packets and actually make it unusable. Evil twin works by de-authentication as well. If there is someone associated to a wireless network, then you push the de-authentication to that client, it bumps off and it tries to re-authenticate, and it will try and re-authenticate with the stronger network. And if you're closer, you can then get the credentials that way. That preferred network list is what I'm talking about when people are probing, or when clients are probing for their network. And we have weak web encryption. That's the classic. This is where it all started. When wireless came out, we had wide equivalency protocol. It was supposed to be secure. Then they came out and cracked it with those weak IVs. And there's all good tools out there to do that. And they're all kind of fairly well developed now. There's even, is it called Greenleaf or something similar in Kali that will do all this for you in a graphical interface. We have weak WA passwords, which is similar. So even if you have WPA, WPA2, if you protect it with just password, and someone can get the authentication handshake that happens between a legitimate client and the access point, they can then run a cracker against that hash. Now, obviously, there's a few layers of hashing in there, but if you've provided the weak password, they're still going to get it. So you still have to have strong passwords, even if you have strong encryption. Obviously, you need that. The WPS, this is the wireless pin setup or something similar, but it's that really easy way to connect to a wireless network. You can get those pins, and there's another way of doing that, brute forcing the pin. And war driving is obvious. People walking around trying to identify weak wireless networks. It's an old school thing. Web application attacks. All right, so this is our #1 target. Okay, so when we're doing penetration testing, most of the joy is with web applications, because web applications are of kind of two breeds. They're either off the shelf, or they're built bespoke for the system, or built in-house, right? Either one of those options presents an issue. Off-the-shelf systems, open source systems, WordPress, Apache, you know, Nginx, PHP, all those sort of packages that you can take and load up, you know, JSP, the Tomcat, all those kinds of packages have all had vulnerabilities in the past and all need to be maintained. So any of these web applications that are off the shelf will need to be maintained. And unless you are a well-resourced IT department, then often that is not the case. That's why, often they're not maintained properly. That is why scanning your perimeter as an internal pen tester is ultra important. You are trying to find the stuff that is on the cliff's edge. You're trying to find the vulnerabilities that everyone can see. That's the number one target. The other type, the bespoke type, the one where it's built in-house, unless you have a very high quality, well-resourced development team, and these are not cheap to run, then most likely they're just pushing together code and making it work and just figuring out how to make it work. They're not thinking about how to make it secure. I've been in meeting rooms with entire teams of developers and I've asked, what is OWASP? Do you guys know what OWASP is? And I have blank stares around the room, and it's that's quite alarming. If you ask your developers, do you know what OWASP is? And I think it's changing, this is a couple of years ago, and they don't know, which is the Open Web Application Security Program, I think. And it's basically a top 10 of do's and don'ts, top 10 of don'ts, or top 10 of vulnerabilities that occur in web applications. And they need to know of these things. And the number one is that command injection and sanitizing input. They need to know these things to develop good web applications. So you have these two types. You have off the shelf and you have bespoke ones. The off the shelf ones will often be identified by a vulnerability scanner because they know about the off-the-shelf stuff, or something like Nikto, right? So it'll look at standard vulnerable systems and go, hey, this is what I found. Nikto is good for that off-the-shelf stuff. The bespoke stuff, we did a little bit of Nikto last week. The bespoke stuff is more like OWASP Zap, that tool and Burp Suite, that tool that scans an application looking for SQL injection, looking for other injection errors, and a whole range of web application problems. So that's really important to remember. If you're looking at two different types, then Zap or Burp for the bespoke, and Nikto and vulnerability scanners for the off-the-shelf. And that's how you look at both of these things. So the problem with web access is there's a contention between access and security, right? So web applications are offering a dynamic view into certain data that is segregated by permissions and limited by permissions within the application. But what that means is that web application, the web application that you are inviting people from outside your organization to have a look at, in the right circumstances, can actually have access to one of the top databases, right? So often, if you're talking about self-serve application is an example of this. Obviously, if you've allowing customers to log in and they're self-serving your web application, then you need to be able to contain that. But in essence, that whole application stack has access from the beginning, the front end of the web application, all the way to the database, okay? It has to manipulate the database. It has to pull data. We can't have an individual database for every user. That application is querying the database and getting information back, and it is only logical controls and application logic that is keeping the data where it should be. And if you're able to bypass that, then you can get all the information. So the contention with web applications is that we want people to use our web applications because it saves the organization money. But we are pushing the organizational information assets right to the edge of the cliff. We have this contention between access, giving everyone access, and securing the data. So this is why web application attacks are a sweet spot. Yeah, so we can do all sorts of things. The really classic one is exploiting for shell. If you can actually get access to the underlying operating system, then you can do more. You can also do, often there's web shells as well. People have created scripts that you can upload, like a PHP script they can upload to a website. And then you can use that to get access to the underlying operating system, run commands, and do all sorts of things. So these are all connected to databases. We'll look at SQL injection as well. But web application attacks, I can't stress it enough. If you are doing scanning of your perimeter, you find all these services where you can log in and try and brute force passwords, but you also find all these web applications. And the web applications are the sweet spot. So that's where we're gravitating to. All right, so how do we test these things? Yeah, okay, sorry, I'm just looking ahead. The goat here is homage to WebGoat. That's a great application that you can go and break. In fact, it's pretty much a full training course. I can encourage you all to do OWASP WebGoat and go through all of the exploits that they show and the typical ones that they show. And demonstrate there. If you can get all of your developers to go through the process of OWASP WebGoat, they would probably go white in the face knowing what is possible. Obviously, VulnHub, we've talked about that. There's lots of vulnerable systems there. One I'll show you tonight called the SQLi to shell. Very interesting. But obviously, it's hard sometimes. You've got to go through the walkthrough to figure out what vulnerability is there. So VulnHub's good for testing your skills against, trying to creatively think about the next step. But if you're targeting a particular type of attack or vulnerability that you want to exploit, then maybe you need to go through the walkthrough to find a good VulnHub for that. There's Damn Vulnerable Linux, a Game of Hacks, Metasploitable, Hack This. There's all sorts of platforms and websites to actually go through and train on all of this. And really it is up to the individual how much of this they do. And those that are really successful in penetration testing get that bug for breaking into stuff and run through all of this stuff and furnish themselves with as much knowledge as possible, create their own systems and databases and knowledge bases of all the different exploits they've done. And then they are more capable for it. All right, so we've done this now. So we might stop here for a second, Guy. I wonder if there's any particular questions about OVAs. We're getting close to, I think next week will be the release of the exam vulnerable machine. I want to make sure everyone is comfortable with downloading OVAs and putting them into VirtualBox. Is there a poll, a yes/no poll we can do on that, Guy? I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
I can make polls, yes. So just a poll, are you comfortable downloading OVAs? Yes, no?
More, are you comfortable importing OVAs into VirtualBox?
Okay, I'll get on that one. I'll just check whether, oh yes, so in the meantime, I'll launch this one, which I've been working on diligently. Which pictures did you enjoy the most? From have a look in the Q&A. There's a few in there that might be of...
Is there a beach in Wagga?
Yes, that was from the last short course, the Master of Applied Digital Marketing. There was a picture of me at Wagga Beach. It was a lovely day and a lovely short course. Any questions in there that catch your eye? There's one from Omar. We'll just go quickly. Do I have
right. Sorry, I don't have it open. I was just admiring your poll.
Do I have to be a programmer to be a web application pen tester?
Oh, say that again.
Do I have to be a programmer to be a web application penetration tester?
So it doesn't hurt to know scripting. And the more you know, the better, obviously. If you can write in Java and PHP and in Python, then these things are all good to know and allow you to find vulnerabilities in scripts and code and source code and all that sort of thing. So you don't need to be because Yeah, so some pen testers would argue with that to be a really good pen tester, you probably should know how to develop and code to a certain degree. I think to be an internal pen tester, you can probably get away with script kidding it all the way through, as long as you're very good at using other people's resources. But you will be hampered and you will have limitations if you don't learn how to code and script, because you won't be able to modify or understand why things aren't working as well. So yeah, it's important to learn. Python is, oh, the goat gets it. Python, I think, is the first one to learn, because a lot of the exploits are written in Python, and it's great for automation. And in some of the other classes that we do in the masters, we actually have a couple of Python labs where we actually want people to create like an SSH password brute forcer, which is completely redundant because we have tools to do that. But the interesting thing was how the different students would tackle the problem, and they actually found that quite difficult. But once they'd done it, they then had an extra skill of being able to kind of push together some pieces of Python to make it work, and realizing what that's all about. So it's a good thing to do. I've kind of waffled on about that, but yeah, it helps. And probably necessary if you are being a professional full-time pen tester, but you can probably get away with it if you're an internal one, but I'd recommend you going down that track.
Okay. Also, I've got a poll going. It's just really basic. Sorry, I forgot the wording wrong. Are you comfortable importing into OVA? Yes, no.
Yeah, and by that, I mean, are you comfortable importing OVAs into VirtualBox and getting them up and running?
See, this is why you shouldn't put people who just talk about pictures
in
technical
works.
short courses.
I'm sure they've got it. That's perfect.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'll answer a couple of other questions. There's a question about being lucky in Australia from Andrew. I think it had to do with time zone actually as well. Like, we just weren't in operation when the time zone happened. I don't necessarily agree with that. That's been some of the discussion, that there weren't as many machines on, or we weren't able to respond to phishing emails. Neither Petya or WannaCry were delivered by phishing emails, but it may help that we didn't have systems running. On the other hand, without anyone there, the virus could have run rampant without being kind of limited. I think we're just so small, to be honest. I think we just don't have that many external IPs in comparison to the rest of the world. When you have a look at a DDoS attack, an example of a DDoS attack, and you look at where all the bots are sending are coming from, you really have the majority in Europe and America. It's enormous. They have enormous networks. And to get through all of the IP addresses, we're just a tiny slice of it. And we're at the end of a very long stick, which is, fiber. So we are a little bit removed from the internet. We have a kind of a natural rate limiting, if you will. That is also changing over time. We are getting bigger pipes, but I think that's really the reason. Dennis, oh, sorry. That's one for you, Guy. Oh, no, maybe you've put it there because you want me to answer it from Dennis.
Oh, I just assume that we'll be giving all sorts of information about the exam next week.
Yeah.
And we'll also finalize all of our processes in the next week as well.
Yeah, that's true. But I can tell you that we will have, it's not do not stop. We're not using that. There is another one, which I won't release until the day, just so that it's fair for everyone. And there are ample walkthroughs for that particular vulnerable machine. But obviously you can't just read the walkthrough and get the keys out of there. There's, I've modified all the flags, so you need to get the flags yourself. So you have to walk through the vulnerability yourself. Oh, that's great. I'm looking at the poll results. That's terrific, Guy. All right, so yeah, so to that 20%, please do get onto the forums. If you're having troubles, or if you just haven't had a chance, make sure you get to do that. We expect you to have a fair bit of time before the exam to go through the walkthroughs. It is effectively your study for the exam. If you don't have the tools to do your study, that's a bit of an issue, and you need to get that sorted out. So get onto the forums and try and ask questions. If you really come stuck, then I'll try and help you out as much as I can. But obviously, there's a lot of people in this
Yeah, 80% know how to do it, so I'm sure they'll be able to help.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, wireless adapters. Yeah, maybe I can give a link for that. For the Evil Twin, Omar, for wireless adapters work well in Kali. I know there's a few TP-Link ones with really big antennas, which are nice because they can boost the signal. But yeah, it does require a certain chipset. So I'll try and make a note to remember that. Hang on a second.
And then as you're doing that, maybe we get onto the rest of the webinar, and we'll do a nice big Q&A, because I think we've made up for some time. There's no presentations or long first one this week, so we can go as long as you all like.
All right. Okay, so right, so we've talked about that. Vulnerable VMs, getting OVAs down. Try a few of the VulnerHub ones. The one I'm going to show you is called SQLi to Shell. Have a look at that. That's good. The do not stop is a good one to walk through. And there's a few that I might suggest in the forum as well to try. Okay, just making a note here. All right. We talked about NAT network and bridge node mode very early on. Obviously, bridge mode you can access from your local network, but NAT node is actually sitting inside your host. I'm suggesting for your for the exam and for the vulnerable machine for the exam that you use the NAT network. Do not. The reason why I'm saying that is that sometimes when you go to bridge mode instead of NAT network for your for your virtual machine, it can rename the adapter in the virtual machine operating system, and then all of the IP, all the configuration around the adapter name, like often it's ETH0 or ETH1, then can drop off, and you can actually break the vulnerable machine. So use NAT network. That seems to work pretty well and gets you going. There we go, I lost my cursor. All right. All right, let's do some demos. We're going to do SQL injection with SQL map. And yes, I am using, basically using SQL map is cheating, because you can do it all on the command line. But then again, we said a lazy hacker is a good hacker. Finding faster ways to do things is always good, and standing on the shoulders of others is good as well. I'm doing a net discover on my range. I think that's going to work. It's always nice when you press enter and we get something back. Now I've got a couple of, or I could do this. I actually have, let's do not stop. It's stolen my cursor. I've got root on these boxes. That's not often the case, but this one's, you can see that the IP address is there. I'm hoping that's clear. Basically one is 10.2.6. This is the one I'm after, and 10.0.2.5. Okay, we can see those in Net Discover anyway. So let's browse to, and this is going to cause my machine to be a little bit unhappy. Let's do not stop. I've gone to the wrong one. My awesome Photoblog. So this is the SQLi to Shell running. Let's have a look at what's going on here. It looks pretty good. If you come across this in a pen test, you're kind of like, oh, wonderful. Okay, there's a login page. So let's have a look. Obviously, I'm not silly, so I've run through this. Now, you've got to get used to copying and pasting in virtual machines. When you're in a window, obviously it's Control-C, just like a normal window. But when you're in a terminal, it's Control-Shift-V for pasting. Let's clear this off the way. All right, so SQL map, what does this look like? It's got a nice graphic, gives us some fairly basic hints. Let's do a URL of HTTP 10.0. And what am I doing? We say a lazy hacker is a good one. Let's try, just do a DBS, which is database search. And no one wanted to tell me I was doing SLQ map. All right. All right. The backend is MySQL. It looks like it might be interesting. All right. Looks like we're actually getting something there. Fetching database names. Operating system Debian 6.0. We're getting all sorts of good information. We can go further. We can ask for, we can see actually we've got two databases here, Photoblog and Information Schema. So let's ask it for the tables that are in the database photo. Looks good. And it didn't give me anything. It's my Photoblog, isn't it? No, Photoblog. Yeah, let's try to get database Photoblog. Oh, I see. Thank you. I'm sure someone's pointed out the lack of that. I should really watch the chat while I'm doing this so you can see my...
This live work is terrifying.
Okay, so we've got categories, pictures, and users. So we're actually using an SQL injection attack, and we've got the union going on here that is able to get to run basically MySQL, and you can actually get SQL map to do SQL injection for you and use it like an SQL command, like a MySQL command line, which is incredible. So we're actually querying the back database here through this application. That is exactly what's happening. So let's go for let's just go straight to columns. And we're going to do table users, because we saw that in the last one. Database Photoblog, and let's just dump it. All right. We're going to say no to that. Yeah, we'll try and crack them. It's getting the table. It's getting passwords. It's identified that there's a column called password, and we can actually crack them. And it's actually run it against a standard crack, and it's pulled out the login is admin, and the password is leet style password. Now that seems a bit easy, but does it work? Let's try admin. And what I'm going to put in here is admin, because that's probably what all of your residential gateway passwords is. Nope, didn't like that. Now I'm going to do that password. I'm pasting that password from the terminal, and it let us in. All right, so obviously that's the tip of the iceberg. And this is a machine, this is a very simple SQL injection attack. Not all this simple, but there you have SQL map making it very easy and actually walking you through the cracking. SQL map is quite a problem. I've actually been in organizations where we've had web application security modules just looking for SQL map, because it puts the agent SQL map in it if you don't modify it. You can say hide the agent so it looks like it's Mozilla or it's Safari or something like that. But if you don't do that and you're just doing an SQL map, then you can actually see it. We find it, block it, and move on. But obviously you don't want any SQL injection attacks, because you can see how it makes that backend database just completely open with the right vulnerability. All right, so that's, now I might, I know we're kind of running into time, but Guy, if there are some Q&A that are any particular questions that are coming up all the time, I'm happy to answer them, because I run through this, but there might be something obvious that I could explain. Is there anything like that?
Not in the Q&A, not really. A little bit in the chat, maybe saying, talk about different options you might use, what your options are.
You're on mute, Guy, is that right?
Can anyone hear? Test 1, 2.
No, okay.
Okay.
Guy may not be there.
Others can hear, Jeremy, but let's just push on.
I think he's trying to unmute himself.
Jeremy, hello.
That's okay. I'm hoping you can all hear me okay. I might just open up chat very quickly just to make sure. Oh, okay. Can you hear me both? Okay. All right, good. All right, I'm going to close the chat. That's far too quick. All right, I'm going to continue on. We might get to Q&A afterwards, and we'll find out some way of communicating between us. Remote file inclusion is basically being able to upload, oh, sorry, inbound and out of band. Inbound SQL injection is using the same mode. We were using the same website to query the website with HTTP as we did the SQL injection. So that's inbound. Out of band is trying to get some sort of communication happening on the side. So you're manipulating the back-end system to maybe talk to a DNS server around the edge or something similar. Blind, you don't get anything back. You have to guess and to try, and it's a bit harder to get feedback from it. So that, you know, maybe it only works when it's successful, but an error is screened out. Remote file inclusion is where you can upload a file and get it the application to run it, or get it to include it somehow in a folder. This is often how web shells work. You upload them, the web shell runs, and it gives you capability. Command injection is going straight to the command line. We had SQL injection, so we're running an SQL injection attack. It makes the database do something that maybe it shouldn't do, but command injection is actually getting it to run a command on the command line itself. So if you're able to break out of, say, PHP and get it to run a command, then you can pretty much come into that machine in that context. Shell injection, that's the web shell, or getting a vulnerable system so that you actually get it to run a shell or run a binary on its local system, so that you can actually get a channel out for issuing commands. And then obviously directory traversal, websites all run on application, all run in file systems. Being able to break out of that root file system, the web root, into the rest of the system is pretty interesting as well, because then you can get other information like password or shadow file or something similar. All right, authentication exploits, and this is actually my favorite picture for the night. It's all these keys on the wall. You don't know how long I tried to find a image for passwords, and I think this is the best one. I'm going to use it regularly, but I love all these keys hanging on the wall. I think it's a fantastic picture. So brute forcing is very important because anything that's internet exposed is being brute forced all the time. If you put SSH on the internet or FTP, you'll just find loads of different attacks all the time trying to guess passwords. Now, I did an interesting experiment with a system in the UK and a system in the US. I was just using some I call them coffee and cake machines, where you pay $5 a month for a virtual machine in a different country and you get an IP address. I put SSH on both of those machines. And I actually started to log the authentication attempts back to a centralized log server back in my network. And I wanted to see where all these attacks were coming from. And what I noticed very soon is that I had the same IP address attacking the UK machine as I did the US machine, and both coming from China. And I thought, what are the possibilities of that? That cannot be a fluke, but there are IP addresses out there just purely trying logins to SSH servers. And they are just going at it all the time, 100% of the time, 24/7, trying to find vulnerable systems. And the reason for that is because the vulnerable systems are out there. The weak passwords are out there, and passwords are getting exposed more and more. You think about all the password breaches that we've had over the last couple of years. Some of those had hashes in them. I bet you those hashes are now being cracked, and those new passwords are being used to try and break into things. The passwords that I saw from this SSH thing, because I modified my SSH server so I could see the actual password being delivered. It's not something it does in standard feature. And I could actually capture the password being delivered. And honestly, it was like password 123. Password 12, password 1, and they were just using the basic worst passwords that might be there. And the only reason they do that is because it actually works. They actually get something out of it. Let's do an online attack. Let's try this out. So let's clear away this. Whoops. We can close our web browser to free up some RAM. Now, what are we doing first? Oh, I haven't shared it yet. Online. Okay, so I have a system here in Do Not Stop. Hang on, I'll just share it. Sorry. Takes a little while to get this into a state where I can show. Okay, so here we are. Do Not Stop. Let's do a cat of Etsy password. Okay, and you can see a username down the bottom here called tester. All right. Now we're going to crack him. Now this is, again, cheating by using a tool, but it's not cheating. We're just making it quick. I'm using Hydra GTK. So Hydra itself is a good command line utility. We have a single, but you've got a GUI here that you can make use of. And if it helps for your learning, and it shows you the actual command down the bottom. So once you've got it working, you can figure out a more efficient way of doing it by scripting or something similar. Our Do Not Stop is on, I think it was on 5. Yeah. Our single target is 10.0.2.5. Our passwords, I want to use a password list. Rocky is a good one. All right. Oops, that's a username list. I actually don't want to use a username list. Just be careful for that. I want to use a username called tester. Okay, so I think this guy's got to have he's a tester account. I've been in organizations where the test accounts all had the same password as their username, and that's commonly the case. So try login as password, try empty password, try reverse login. You see these are typical things that are used in test machines, but obviously that does happen. Password list, rock you. All right. Tuning, you can tell it how many tasks. We'll leave it at 16. There's no proxy needed for this because it's SSH. Have I defined? Oh, I haven't defined SSH. As you can see, it can do a fair few different service types. And here's SSH. And then we start it. All right, off it goes. So we can actually do a tail of the authentication log, which is in var log auth. Right, we can tail that and see what actually is happening. You can see there's network traffic going on by the flashing lights down here. Is it actually coming? Oh, look at that. So we're having failed password from tester, failed password, failed password. It's going absolutely nutso. Then has it finished? Yeah, look at that. We got login, tester, sunshine. Okay. That's pretty nice. Let's see if that works. N.0.2.5. Well, I can't remember these things, just confirming. We'll say yes, we're connecting to it. Hey, there we go. I'm now in this other, and now I'll get out. So that's the online attack, right? So what is going on here is that we have a service and we are at the mercy of how many password attempts the service will let us do. And as you could see with this service, it actually stopped us at too many authentication failures, stopped us, and then it didn't allow us to, it tried to rate limit us. That means that we didn't actually get that many attempts in. If you actually have a look at, I wonder if I've got it here. Yeah, I've got RockU. If you ever actually have a look at RockU, which is just a list of words, if we go down to Sunshine, I chose Sunshine because it's only number 24 in the list, or 26, right? So we got it fairly quickly, but you can imagine if you're 10,000 or 100,000 or 1 million passwords that you're trying to throw at this, it actually takes you a lot of time because it's going to rate limit, it's going to slow you down. Okay. Now another password, so to do an online attack, we're actually using the local CPU to try and reverse a hash. And hashes come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. MD5 is very weak. SHA-1 is better. SHA-256 is even better. And salting is even better. Often when you get a password list off a Unix box, they've salted it so that one, it's not susceptible to rainbow attacks, which is pre-computed hashes in essence. And two, that two passwords don't look the same. So if you hash password with MD5, you get one result. If you hash password again with MD5, you get the same result. But if you throw a salt in front of it and you hash MD5 with that salt, you get a different result if you change the salt on the next time. So it makes password hashes look different as well. So it's a good thing to do, and most Unix systems do it. So there's a couple of tools. Hashcat is a good one. It sometimes is finicky about what systems it runs on. So John the Ripper is good too, JTR. Shame about the name. It's a bit of a horrific name, but it's a very like the original password cracker. And they're both good to use. But the Hashcat's very simple, and I'll show you an example here. So I have a let's see, I think I have a file called hashes. There is 4 hashes in there. They're MD5 hashes. I chose them because I'm running in a virtual machine on a virtual CPU, so I only have a limited amount of space for a limited amount of power for doing this. So we're going to run a hashcat, and what happens when you run hashcat gives you some simple options. Hashcat, we are going to do a mode 0, which is MD5 is the mode 0. The attack mode 0 as well. So we're just doing a straight out attack. If you had SHA-1, it might be M1000 or something like that, but there is a list that you can have a look at. And then we're going to use the, we're going to look at the hash file, and then we're going to use the dictionary, as it says in the help there, which is the ROCU. All right. And running that, it's not happy. Native Intel OpenCL it always tries to use like graphics cards or some sort of better library to do faster cracking, because that's what this is all about, getting the most out of your CPU. And this is why doing it on bare metal is actually better. We're going to override that and just say force, because we're happy to run it slowly. And we're just going to run in the background. Oi! So that was very quick. It was taken out of a cache hit. So unfortunately, I have cracked some of these before. There's 4 there: Sunshine, Baby Cakes, Password 1, and Tester. But obviously this takes a little bit more time than that. When I ran this before, it actually took about 3 minutes to get all of them. So it's a good way to identify how long these things are going to take. So if you get a whole bunch of hashes in a competition and you are trying to crack them, you've kind of got to decide either dedicate a machine to it, dedicate CPU time to it, or have a good understanding of how long it's going to take you to crack them. In this case, there are obviously easy passwords, and they are able to be cracked quite simply. But that is the command line to run hashes against a dictionary file and reverse them. Okay. All right, now we're getting way over time, so I better persist. All right, so back to it. That was, so authentication attempts are very much that, guessing the keys, getting user credentials, also session hijacking, and can be specific to the web framework or the application frameworks that's being used. If you are able to actually hijack someone else's session, get into another authenticated session. These happen every now and then. I think there was something in the news once where a telco, recently where a telco had an issue with everyone getting a guy called Roman or something like that. Anyway, everyone got into one profile on one day. The poor guy just got that. So obviously they're in the wrong session. But if you can make that happen and just change the ID of the session, then that's a good way of doing it if it's susceptible to that. Default creds are quite serious if you have them on the internet. The really obvious ones to look for are those lights out, or the remote control cards have basically a Linux distro on them themselves, have their own IP address, and often they come with default credentials, and sometimes accidentally given internet addresses. Then breach credentials are a treasure trove of information for the bad guys at the moment. They are just trawling through different systems and web applications and using the account credentials they have to try and pop people's accounts and details and create fraud. So breach credentials are also good if you can get your hands on those, but also watch out for them. The LinkedIn ones are probably the most useful ones. Web application logic exploits are really playing with how the web application works to get it to do something it shouldn't do. So parameter tampering, making changing the dollar price of a certain product so it's much cheaper. Modifying the ID of something, so maybe a user ID or a session ID or a group ID, giving yourself admin rights in a particular application. Cross-site scripting can either be persistent or redirected. Persistent means that you put it into something like a forum. You're able to post a cross-site scripting so that if someone, you're able to post a script, so that if someone actually logs in later and views that page, then they would have that script run on their machine. Redirect is basically being able to give someone a URL and saying, hey, go and visit this, and then being able to do a cross-site script on that as well. It is really a threat to the users of the web application. Cross-site request forgery, using tabs and being able to break in between the tabs. So from a dodgy site to a banking site, from a dodgy site to a site that has actual, can take requests that actually mean something, is how that works. Privilege escalation in Unix is a bit of an art form in itself. There are some things that work really well, like the dirty cow exploit, but really what you are doing is once you've got access to a system as a general user, you can't change passwords or jump into certain files or read certain things or change the system in any way. So you have to get privilege escalation to get beyond that. So often there are sudo permissions that you can make use of, so they can be quite complex and people can leave holes in there. So maybe you can run Vim as a root and you can access everything. Suid is a similar sort of situation where you have a set user ID when exploited. So you actually go as a, executed. So you actually go as a higher level in that application. And enables you to do things. So looking for those sorts of things is an easy way into privilege escalation. Then obviously kernel exploit and things like that are exploiting particular applications that are running as root and trying to get into that context. Dirty cow was very good and useful for a lot of Unix systems, now often patched. Privilege escalation in Windows, getting passwords is obviously really important. There was that C password, have a look into that, where this is the registry storing, the storing of credentials in registry that are set when a system is built. So it enabled the automation of setting systems, but at some point in time, Microsoft published the key for that. So if you found this in a Windows domain, you could actually just obtain those passwords. Very convenient to get passwords when you're doing a pen test. Even if this is easy to do, it shows some sort of skill. Clear text credentials around the place in Excel files, in batch files, looking for keys, credential dumping from SAM, if you actually get root, you get PW dump, or getting it from Mimikatz. Which is NotPetya actually use Mimikatz to get authentication credentials for other systems and move along that way. And obviously keyloggers. If you can actually get something to run on the system and get a keylogger on it, then you can most likely get passwords as they move around different applications. Whew, all right, we've run a bit over time. For next week, try doing the same, reverse some hashes, work with THC Hydra, try using it for a web application or FTP, get familiar with Metasploit, start using some of the commands, run through some of the walkthroughs, and also have a look at quizzes. Guy will try and... I just got that message from...
Hello.
Oh, I can hear you.
Oh, excellent. Hello, never mind. Please disregard those text messages.
No problems. Okay.
Beauty. All right. Well, there's tons of questions, many about Kelly. So
okay, sure.
maybe put through those ones which are marked. Let's answer live. And then I'll, again, as usual, the questions are a bit inscrutable to me. So perhaps if you could say who was asking them and what they're asking and go for an answer session.
So Christian asks about success with WPS pin attacks. I'd say getting it to the point where you've got very weak pins and trying it out yourself and making sure the actual concept works. So the tool that you're using works. So in other words, try it in a lab and get it going in real life. Jamie, technology around WIP. Is that web intrusion protection? Oh, wireless intrusion protection. I haven't used it very much. Sorry, I haven't come across it at all, to be precise. I think a lot of the intrusion protection, it can be a good idea. It can tell you when things are going wrong. Hopefully your wireless is strong enough and your passwords in your organization are strong enough for it not to be an issue. Obviously you can get people trying to break in, but mostly yeah, you should be able to set up your wireless so it's mostly impervious to those sorts of attacks, but anything that tells you when things are going wrong is good. So IPS, I'm presuming, will tell you, hey, there's someone trying to attack. Yeah, not surprising popular, because there would be a lot of that in heavily populated areas. With DDoS packet, could this act as DDoS for wireless in a particular area? Yeah, definitely. So you got not a great deal, actually. Yeah, it's a bit of a pain. I think maybe something like the IPS to try and drown it out somehow, but still DAuth packets are a bit of a pain. Yeah, just as long as you know what's happening, actually physically walking up to where that's coming from. Some of the web application, sorry, the wireless security systems will actually make a layout of your area, and you can identify where things are coming from. So that's probably the best one. Any method for mitigate email spoofing from outside your network, like someone sending email on behalf of Gmail or any other domain? Yeah, that is such a pain. This is the whaling attack. So the things that I've seen work well are quite sophisticated web filtering products that will actually allow you to do some sort of logic based on the display name. And that's generally how these things are caught, but it is a big problem. So I think that's probably the best advice, and also user education as well. Ben asks, will the exam OVA need NAT for internal only or bridge for external? Actually, NAT for internal, NAT network actually. So make sure you set up that NAT network that is in that guide. And yeah, join your OVA to that. How can you test your network perimeter if you're within your perimeter? Yeah, you can get so this is from anonymous attendee. Hello, anonymous. You can basically get a fairly inexpensive machine outside of your network to do testing from, or do it from home with the approval. Obviously, everything with the approval is the point as well. Michael asks, what version of Kali am I using? He scratches his face, unsure. It's probably about 6 months old. Yeah, I'm not sure. I can have a look.
There's a follow-up, because he's used a few copies and the new version he's not a fan of.
Oh, right.
He felt the older version had more features.
I see, Michael. Yeah.
Oh, by the way, everyone, I'll cut the questions off here. Any questions asked after here, I think we'll just run too late. So we'll get to those that we've already got.
Yeah, okay. So I would say if you've got tools that are missing in your new Kali, obviously install them and find out how to install them. Yeah, I think that, I mean, they change it over time. So yeah, but best to keep up to date. That's the principle there. StudySec 2019, are there many Windows-based pen test tools? Just not as much. There's wireless network tools. There's all sorts of tools built on Windows that attack Windows, but really your starting point is Kali. And if there is some vulnerability that you are trying to exploit, that you need a Windows tool for, fairly unlikely, but it does happen, but not as much. Can you demonstrate remote file inclusion? Not tonight. There is a good Vuln hub for that. So maybe I'll put I know of a good Vuln hub for that. I just can't remember its name. I'll put a note to put it in the discussion. Wish I could do more demonstrations, but they do take time. How do you track, Jason asks, how do you track when these attacks are being launched against your system? So you saw the logs, right? And this is a major thing about defensive cybersecurity or blue teaming and understanding what is happening on your network. So the logs showed that we had a authentication attempt from this IP address that was trying a particular username. That would tell me a lot of things. If I saw that as a security professional, security analyst looking at a screen going, hey, there's now 200 failed authentication attempts to a valid username, either there's something that's gone wrong or there is someone trying to attack. So that's how you find with the logs. Logs give you visibility, gives you knowledge. Knowledge equals power to stop the attacks. Details on blind bullying. Oh, not tonight, Mark. That's probably a bit beyond the discussion question. So Mark V, I'd suggest you go check out online the blind Boolean SQL attacks. Pete, is link to Escalation download available? Yeah, I can put it up there. It's a Vuln Hub. Just do a search, but I can put for my heavy typing. I type heavily when I'm trying to type fast. Esquire to
Can't even hear it.
shell link. Oh, good.
Type away there.
Deafening to me. Oh, what is salt? Well, it's NaCl. That's a bad joke. Abduram, salt is actually just random 6 characters in front of the hash that are included in the hash but aren't secret to give it some sort of flavor.
Also, congratulations, Abdurrahman, on applying for the Cybersecurity Masters.
Oh, well done.
Just in the last week.
Well, I hope to see you in a future class. SGA Green Gardening Professionals gets free advertising and asks the question, how easy would it be to guess a complex characterized password? It is difficult with a brute force attack that is just going through serial passwords, guessing from scratch. But if you actually have that strong password in a previous password list, then it is trivial. If it's in there, it's in there. Darren, correct, Raz, but if you don't have the experience, they provide a few years against the experience. No, that's something else, I think. Daryl A says, from a security standpoint, wouldn't it be better to have the vulnerable machine in an isolated network and the Kali have one nick in NAT and other in the ISA, otherwise putting trust in the vulnerable machine as it would be able to call back and reach anything on your LAN? Yeah, I guess the risk is pretty low. And anything that is created by someone else might actually have, you know, attack commands in it. On your home network, I think it's okay. You can watch the traffic going out with TCP dump or something similar, or Wireshark. But I've not had a situation where these machines suddenly hack back. Most of them are genuine people trying to, you know, learn and find. But yes, there is a risk of that. And if you are concerned about it, it's a good idea to maybe set up your own network that's got internet access, you know, through a dongle or something like that, and attack through that. So if you are concerned about it, but my risk assessment is fairly low. In saying that, I wouldn't leave a Vuln Hub machine running indefinitely. I would be only using it and having it on for the time that you need to have it on. There's a setting you can, Glenn asked, there's a setting you can port on the switch ports to block DHCP service. Yes, good one. Thank you for that. That's true. Oops, what was that last one from Jay? I just missed it.
Do we all get the same OVA?
Yes, you do get the same OVA. And to that point, obviously sharing the flags just ruins it for everyone. So the expectation is this is an exam. Sharing the exam answers is not a great idea. So make sure you, you know, you respect the process and other people's attempts to try and genuinely learn.
A good point, well made. Thank you.
Yeah. Right.
And
right.
thank you very much. Good long question session. Now. Thank you everyone for sticking with us. We've still got 400. We had about 500 or 600 tonight, and probably more like 700 individual attendees. It's been very exciting, and thanks for another interesting session full of wonderful pictures.
Good.
Alrighty, well thanks, Jez. I'll let you throw to the break again.
Throw to the break? Yep.
Or say good night.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, not familiar with the wireless term there. All right.
Yeah, we really should just end with like a 1940s wireless quote every week. That'd be great fun. Before any of you joined, I was playing Tom Waits at Jeremy, and he didn't like it. So
oh no, not saying I didn't like it.
Just a bit Kenny G. I think Kenny G has negative connotations. Jeremy, come on.
Maybe, unless you're in an elevator, it's exactly what you want to hear.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks heaps for another good week.
All right. Yeah, thank you everyone, and thanks for the participation, the questions. I thoroughly enjoyed this session. See you next week.